Okay. This will be a little bit different of a presentation for you because, first of all, I'm been a regional planner, a practitioner for 35 years, and I really didn't find out about regional science until maybe 10 years ago, or even less, because my major professional association was with the American Planning Association, also belonged to the World Future Society. And I started in '73 as a regional planner in Virginia, having become interested in cities, going to Europe on the budget plan in the U.S. Navy. So I couldn't understand why, as an enlisted man, I could get around any European city very easily, but back in the States, you know, without a car, you didn't get anything. So regional development, though, has been my focus from 1973 to 2008 when I retired and figured that was enough. And I started out really working with, found out about the Regional Studies Association because I wondered where American regional policy was coming from, because it really wasn't working very well for us. It wasn't that connected. So I started looking at regional scale to try to understand, because the politics that I dealt with, dealt with cities and towns and counties and the state and the federal. So I was dealing with all these levels of government to get incentives so our region could develop. Okay, so in today, though, 2013, what are our development challenges? Well, they seem to have multiplied. You know, we're dealing with the financial crisis. Those after effects are, you know, will we ever get rid of those? We've got peak oil climate change, which we learned a lot about this morning, at least what it even takes to try to understand what's going on. So in dealing with people, when we look at what looks like maybe a pretty bleak future when you add up all the negatives, I'll say that, you know, the only thing that's going to save us is community. And that's something that people resonate with. No one's yet disagreed, but what is it about community that we depend on to save us in certain situations? Because, you know, aren't we told that it's the profit motive that actually delivers all things great and wonderful? And any problem that just is unsolved, it's just the profit motive hasn't come into play. But I think, you know, there's some problems there. Anyway, you know, but the motive is the goal and the driver for economic activity. And when it comes to regional development, you know, if you're trying to raise incomes and standards of living, the first goal is for a community that wants to develop is to be business friendly. They've got to be able to come there and make a profit. So in a multi-jurisdictional region, local governments are told to collaborate, cooperate, and build this needed business environment, you know, where people are going to come in, open up shop, make money, and that's how you're going to, people are going to get paid. And this is regardless of the size or type of region. This is what's going to be going on. You are to collaborate and cooperate. Then there's this thing I mostly work with, which I call you know, political geography. Those boundaries. And you're dealing with elected officials now, but what's their motive when they're investing in their community? Are they just trying to improve the tax base? Are they just trying to get better wages? Is that all it is? Based on my experience, again, working with communities for many years, I think there's a community motive in established historic communities, and their goal is to keep that community in business, perpetuated over time. Generations, decades. And those timescales don't show up in a lot of data, but they're real there. I lived in the Shenandoah Valley here in Front Royal, and the local history society, the director there, is giving a report of the history of the formation of the county and how it was subdivided out of a larger county. When they first petitioned to create Warren County, a separate county, they were turned down by the House of Burgesses in Williamsburg, I think it was at the time. It was still the colony, because the area would not be big enough to support a county. 80 years, it took them 80 years to become recognized and to establish a county. So that intent, what I would call the founder's intent, this is intent, goes into all these local government boundaries that so many people are dismissive of. And so, all of our boundaries and the government structures in place, I'm saying, are highly intentional creations by the citizens of the day in accordance with the laws of the time and their bounded regions, they continue with this intentionality, and their boundaries are integral to their identity. And identity is not simply brand. We are all supposed to have brands. Everything in the world, also a big part of economic development is getting your brand and being a brand. And that's part of the regional development game. And local officials are often told to put on their regional hat. But can there really be such a thing as a regional hat? Now this is this is a brand. It's got all the gizmos with it. But and so I'm going to use here the hat as a indication of identity. So I live in the town of Front Royal. Here's the geological footprint there in the center of Warren County. I elect the mayor and town council, and that entitles me to wear a Front Royal hat.
You guys need to have a brand.
We'll get there. Okay, and so this is my sub-county regional county. Okay, but it's also part of Warren County, and so I get to wear this hat as well. I'm from Warren County. Now in Virginia, of course, Front Royal is a town, so it's part of the county. If this was a city, then there would be no county hat. Okay, but and then as a resident of the county, I elect constitutional officers, Commissioner of Revenue, and my supervisor. Okay, and then, well, I'm also Virginia. Now, this was a red hat because that's the way I voted, but Virginia is a blue hat. So, and this is my subnational region, Virginia, and I get to elect House of Delegates representative, Senate, State Senate, the governor. I'm in District 6 for the House, and I have 2 senator votes. So that comes next, and then of course I've got my ultimate hat, perhaps, as a citizen of the United States. Also, it's a subplanet sovereign region. So these are political identities and regional hats that I wear and I get as a consequence of being a voter. Now, above that we've got our local planet. We've got our whole Earth region. And these identities have a vote, pay taxes and get services. And the outcome of this is community security for me, my family, guests, and the hats. They're all neatly stored here, so I can just grab whatever one I want to be at any particular moment. So, what about, though, having a multi-jurisdictional region? Well, this is my region here, Northern Shenandoah Valley. Virginia has a pretty long history of planning for regional development. They had a state planning board in '33. They had actually proposed regional planning commissions in 1944. The Virginia Area Development Act was passed in 1968, and that led to the design of the political subdivision in Virginia, the Planning District Commission. And this is my region. This is where I worked from 1973 to 2008. In 1995, they had a regional partnership program where they gave to regions that created a business, colleges, you created a special organization as a partnership, and then the state would give you money to invest in your priorities based on your plan. That didn't last too long, and because the General Assembly, we were told, they didn't like to see the local governments giving away that money. They would rather do that themselves. So today we have some regional marketing groups going on, and there are a lot of different maps. But the planning districts continue to be, now that they're going on 40 or 50 years old, having an identity. Now, what's a regional identity in comparison to these local identities? Well, your vote is indirect. The local government appoints people to the region. The taxes are indirect. You pay an assessment to the county or the town that funds the regional organization. Services, they may be direct or they may be indirect. So, this results in contributions to the community and creates what I call a regional community. Now, is a regional hat going to work in this situation? Well, when people show up to their regional organization, they already have their identities and they're wearing their hats. Well, so could we maybe have a bigger hat? Is my regional hat going to work here? Well, it works in a way, but I lose my identity. And that's an important thing. So what we sort of need more is one of these fellows, a regional umbrella that's going to not cause me to lose my identity, but is a regional thing that we can shoot for. So, now, new regions are what I'm calling here data shadows. Here's a map of the mega regions. They're data shadows. They don't have umbrellas or MSAs. Okay. They're statistical regions. They're data shadows, but they do change. Now, the regional councils are existent in most states, and they have. That's what a map of them would approximate. So now what I'm observing, and I want you to think about, is that the region is always a new geography. And so when you roll it out and take people, it's always going to be at odds with the existing political boundaries. And putting on a regional hat is a loss of identity. And because the region could mean consolidation. That was the big fear in Virginia when the planning district commissions were created, because they were a political unit and they were intending to deliver services regionally. So the counties and the cities resisted them initially, and the planning district commissions were not allowed to deliver any services. But that came about over time, after there was some comfort with that. So, but there's this long-term need to become regional, which in fact I think now is really, you have to be greater in order to respond. The reason you go regional is you have to be greater. You need to show a bigger workforce, a bigger this, and include these assets. So the real reason why you go regional is to become greater and not lose your identity. And so if this community motive that built and maintains the local governments can be tapped at a regional scale, things get better. But it takes a long time. So my simple formula is DNA, define, name, and align. And that was one of the great strengths of the Virginia system when it was implemented. Now, 40, 50 years later, it's still getting its legs. It's still becoming part of the consciousness because, you know, these local hacks, nobody wants to give them up. When they call 911, they want to know. So never underestimate that hack and how they got there. So now, how many community motives can we have? How many motivations are there? Well, we can have and wear many hats representing our communities. And, you know, the hat rack may actually look more like this in terms of all the organizations, all the communities that you may belong to. I normally don't wear them all at once, you know, but they're there and they can be used when required. So there's one final level of community I think we need to think about here. Here's a nightclub you might have visited at some point. We're at Manfield on the 14th floor here. And so in this environment, you know, if we were asked where did we come from, we might say Earth or give our coordinates in space. But we put on our human hat and we'd sort of be thinking about our local planet, where we came from, where we need to act regionally in these circumstances. So that's me and I'm done, so at least it might have been entertaining. Okay, so.
Okay, well, as you might imagine, this is not the kind of paper that I'm used to finding on. And not least of which is because there is no paper, it's just the presentation you see. So I really didn't know where to start, but as I thought about it, I think Tom's presentation sort of highlights or underscores or points at a number of different dichotomies or ranges over which we think of things. And so I made a list of them here. Really, when he was talking about regional, the interesting thing there is the distinction of regions versus space. And I mean, we define as regional economists regions for practical purposes sometimes, because that's we need to get a greater one. But we're really often thinking about space, and those are two very different things. So sometimes a region is small, sometimes it's big, as you point out. And it underscores, when we're talking about community, the distinction between places and spaces, too. The actual the difference about things that make places unique versus the distance between places and the relationship between places in space. So I think there's some of that underlying some of the ideas here as well. But one of the things that I think that you have to challenge yourself with when you think about the kind of issues that Tom's raising you said something like communities where it happens, but it seems to me that there are scales of problems and there are scales of solutions, or there's scales of mechanisms. And so in many of those different scales, they have their roles. They have their roles. We're not, despite the attempts by cities and states to deal with climate change mitigation, for instance, we're not going to solve this problem at the local level because we just invite people to take advantage of the sort of spatial free rider problem. So I think all of those scales are necessary, but we have to align the problems with the solutions. So another issue, I think, we often expect ourselves or other people to line up behind a competition versus a collaboration, especially when it comes to cities and places and spaces and jurisdictions and so on. In reality, there's a place for both collaboration and there's a place for competition. I think many good things have come as local areas compete with each other and distinguish each other from their neighbors and so on. And I would be remiss if I didn't bring up one of my favorite concepts, and that's the Thibault hypothesis, and the idea that really the overall national or regional or state performance really depends on diversity rather than on similarity. So competition is good, collaboration is good. And I think the other sort of spectrum that I think your discussion talks about that's interesting is the overlay of political jurisdictions. And you talk about the resistance of counties towards regions, and we see that all over the world, right? That there's sort of that political overlay, but there's underlying that, and very importantly, are the natural and ecological differences across space, which don't line up with those lines at all, and then the economic ones and the social ones and so on. So, and when we have these jurisdictions, which I think of as legacy governance systems, we lock in time. We sort of freeze the circumstances, the social and economic, and in some sense the natural circumstances in one era, and then we have to work against odds to make our governance system evolve to meet the changing layers of natural and social and economic contexts that are dynamic, whereas our governance systems are so non-dynamic. So anyway, those were the things that occurred to me as I read this very interesting presentation. So.
Those are all good points, and I think the whole, again, you're presented with this dichotomy: you either collaborate or you compete, but competition is actually what makes it stronger. So managing the competition between localities and getting them to cooperate. I think that the United States, in fact, was designed to be regional, in that the boundaries could not be used to inhibit trade. So there are plenty of counties that would like to put up a toll booth and keep people in and out. But again, so there's this irony that you can freely flow throughout the country and buy and do and things like that. So those regional boundaries of markets are what I call boundaries of convenience when you design that. But the political boundaries are boundaries of consequence. When you cross that line, the rules change. Virginia's often criticized for the Dillon rule, but as a delegate explained to me, that was just so things couldn't be so difficult. You want, again, we've got this free movement. So building these identities and these regional identities based on a watershed or an airshed or things like that, those are all possible, doable things. So again, if you, they're, okay. there's too many maps of regions, and if you change the boundaries for every little issue, then there would never be any stable boundaries. So we're very, to make the governance boundaries work, is a doable, it's a necessary thing. And this climate change stuff is going to make it real necessary. So thank you all very much.
Okay, we gotta skip questions until the end, otherwise we'll shortchange our last guy, who's not me, huh? Okay, well this ties in, I think, very nicely with the